If you think I'm taking this for my own benefit, I'm not. You visitors, they're going to put it in the library back here. Not just mine, but every Sunday we have somebody to give their life story from their childhood up to a certain amount of time. So this week is my time, I guess. My story begins back September the 8th, 1942. I was told this week to be serious when I give this story, so I am. The reason I remember back in 1942 is because my dad wouldn't speak to me for a year after I was born. I was 3 days late, and he wouldn't talk to me. So he's the one that told me to be serious. All right, I'll try to be serious. The best thing I remember when I was a kid was it back in 1942, a few years this side of that. I remember, the first thing I think I remember was when, I don't know how old I was, but I remember my two brothers used to run out and jump on the car. We had the old Model T or some kind of a old car. It had a running board on the side. And when he'd come home from work, my dad would come home from work, they'd run out and jump on the running board and ride into the yard with it. Well, I never did do that till one day I decided I guess I would try it, and he seen his first opportunity to take care of me, so I run and done it, and he run over me. And that's the first thing I remember. That was when me and my bad childhood began. That stuck with me for years. Now, I figured if he had two of them running after him and he never hit either one of them, and I was the only one, and he got me, I figured there had to be something behind that. But it took me a few years. That's what my analyst said, a few years ago. He said that was all that stuff is built into one thing. Then the next thing I remember is moving. It seemed like we moved every time the sun went down. I don't know whether Daddy wasn't paying his rent or what, but it seemed like every time we'd get a friend or two, he'd say, well, we're moving. And to when you're little, you don't like to do that much because it scares you when you go from one town to another and one school to another. Clifford said, I think in his talk, that he went to, how many? 11 different schools when he was growing up. I think I went to 5 different grade schools, or 6. I remember starting school at Berkeley, and then we moved to Pinckneyville, then we moved to the Center, and then to Barnhill, and to Wycliffe. And I think those 3 was have-to cases. I don't think he was paying his rent, and I think they made him move the last 3 times. And then we moved to Peoria, or East Peoria, down in the Richland Bottom, and I did go through all my high school in all 8 years of my high school up here in East Peoria. But going on, you think I'm kidding, don't you?
That whole 5 years,
Huh?
it took you 5 years just to...
I said 8. Well, anyway, I don't remember a whole lot about my childhood because because I don't remember a whole lot, but I do remember some very important things to me in my life. Was my biggest memories of my childhood, and really I was just kidding about getting popped around. I never did get hit that much. But my grandmother is one thing that really comes to my mind when I was young. She got sick when my granddad died. She got sick, so she asked us to move back to Kentucky from Pinckneyville to help her on the farm, and we did. And when she got sick, she used to read Bible stories to me. There's nobody, I don't believe, that has ever been able to read a Bible story like my grandmother could, because she could make you think that you were right in the Samson and David and all those Bible stories that she used to read to me. she would make just make them sound so good that I'd never forget those stories, because it seemed like I was David or I was Samson or that type. She could read that well. That would make you seem you were right into the story with her. And I never knew how important those stories would be to me till I got bigger. But I had made a profession of faith when I was 7 years old, when we lived in Pinckneyville, and you've heard this a million times, and maybe you're going to hear it one more time. Maybe it won't bother you too much, but this church that we was going to in Second Baptist Church in Pinckneyville, this girl had made a profession the week before was saved. I'm not doubting that she was saved. But the women were crying and the men were shouting and all this and that over that, and I thought, well, hey, that... And I never was one to try to get attention, so I thought, well, she can handle that. I might be able to handle a little of that myself. So here I went the next week. Now, here's another thing my dad done me now. I'm glad he did now, but he shouldn't have done it. But I told him, I sat beside him. See, I had it already planned. I never would sit beside him in church because he'd smack me if I got out of hand. But this Sunday I was going to behave myself, because I knew what I was working up to, I guess. And I sat beside him, and I told him I won't be saved. He said, shut up and go to your mother. So I went to my mother, and I told her that I would like to be saved this Sunday, and so she took me forward and talking to me, and they were teaching me how to be saved, but I just wasn't old enough to grasp it. I wasn't too bright, I guess, at 7 years old. But as time went by, all of my life story or life history or whatever you want to say has been growing up around the church. We went to church. There wasn't no being made to go to church. I hear people say now that I don't believe in making my kids go to church. We wasn't made to go to church, but it was just an understanding when we got up on Sunday morning. We got ready and we went to church. There just wasn't. We was trained to go to church, and that's the proper way to do it. You train the kids to go to church, and they won't do it. And we just did it. And that was my life growing up in church. But I did rebel against that when I got to be in, I don't know whether it was moving from the farm up here to East Peoria or getting into a big city and getting into a lot of stuff I didn't have any business getting into. But so the word preacher's kid would scare you. And you didn't want to be I always pictured a preacher's son was a sissy. You know, he was a sissy type kid, and I didn't want no part of that. I didn't want nobody to think that I was a sissy, so that's the reason I was so strong in sports. I've told you before, the only thing that was bad to me about sports was before it started and when it was over. I hated to go. I hated when the game was over or whatever, because I knew I would be lonely again. I was always looking for something. And sports at that time was what was actually keeping me going, I think. And I remember one night I went to Kentucky after I got out of school. I graduated. I did make it, and I didn't go to school 5 years. I only went 4.5. I did have to go back for an extra semester. But I did. When I graduated at midterm, I went to Kentucky for 3 months. Now, I went to church one Sunday. I'd sat under my dad's preaching all my life, and he'd been preaching on hell and how terrible that place was. And I did go to this church, the little home church, Ohio Valley. And this preacher brought the same message, but he brought it in a little different way. It was only 15 minutes. That was the shortest message I'd ever heard, and he kept my attention for that 15 minutes. And I got to thinking about that he was actually, I guess, preaching to me. And I had been thinking about it all from, I would say, from about 13 years, when I was 13 up to about now, which I was 18, I guess, at this time, about whether I was saved or lost. I couldn't convince myself that I was lost because I said I had went forward at one time. But anyway, when I came back home, there's another incident that me and my dad had a falling out. I called home once, and I was kind of lonely, so I called my dad. His question to me that time said, "Who's paying for this phone call?" I said, "You are," and he said, "Hang up." so I hung up, and there I was again, just about 300 miles from home, nothing to do, and some river bottom. You couldn't believe how we lived down there. You think the beard and stuff now, you are seeing what we looked like when I did come back home. When I did get back home, I had to take a bath. That was the first thing Daddy made me do, is take a bath before he let me come to the house. We lived like dogs. I ain't kidding you. It was a shame the way we did live. I didn't realize at the time. I thought we was having a good time at the time, but it was terrible. But when we did come back, Christ really started dealing with me then, stronger than he'd ever done before. I remember one night waking up, and it was lightning and thundering outside, and I've said this time and time again, but it is actually the truth. I woke up and I thought I had died and went to hell. That's just how under conviction I was. A big lightning bolt hit right beside the house, and it just literally scared me to death because I thought I had woke up in hell. And I got up and I made a beeline for my dad and Mom's bedroom. I said, I can't take it anymore. I've got to be saved. So I went toward the bedroom, and I got to the bedroom door, and the old devil got a hold of me then. He said, "Now your dad don't want you messing with him this time of night." So I convinced myself not to wake him up, and I went back to my bed, and I sat on the side of the bed till daybreak because I was afraid to go to sleep. And then daybreak comes. I fell asleep, and then I forgot about it that day till that Sunday. I promised the good Lord that day, if you'll let me get through the night this coming Sunday, I'll be saved. Now, you'll make promises when you get under conviction like I was. You'll make promises that you don't believe if you were as miserable as I was. And I was just trying to do anything to get to sleep that night. I was that scared. So that Sunday, I don't know what message was on that Sunday, but everything kept going over my mind. You made me a promise the other night. That's all I could remember was that promise I had made God. And after everything they started singing, it started getting a little easier to just sit there. So I thought I had it made again. I've been fighting this. You don't know how miserable a person can be fighting Sunday after Sunday not to go forward or turning their back on God. And I fought it till about the last stanza, the last part of the chorus. And I don't know, it just seemed like something opened up to me and said, "You made me a promise, this is it. You either go now or you'll never go." And he never got that go out till I had my dad around the neck. And I was saved that morning. I'll never forget that. I've got my square marked right down here. And I'll never forget that Sunday morning. I've turned my back on God several times since then. But there's one thing that from that time forward, I doubted from the time I was 7 years old till I was 19 years old about my salvation, which I was lost during that time. But there's one thing I can be thankful for since that morning, that Sunday morning I was saved. That was January the 18th, 1962. Till that morning, from that morning till now, I've never doubted my salvation. And I thank God for that. Now, I've heard people say they have doubted at times, but that's one thing I've never had to do since that time is doubt, because I know Christ came into my heart that time. And from that time till now, you more or less know my story. But my story is always, I try to tell my stories to relate to the young people